Good afternoon. As you guys get on the webinar, please remember to mute yourselves. If not, we'll make sure everybody's muted before we get started, and we'll give everybody a couple of more minutes to get on and settled, and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so I have noon on my computer, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on saving and storing seeds. I am Miranda Edge in Harrison County, the Ag and Natural Resources Extension Educator. And with me, I have Abby.
Hi, my name is Abby Heidenreich. I'm the Ag and Natural Resources Extension Educator in Orange County.
Thank you. So we hope everybody is enjoying themselves on this very wet day and maybe enjoying some of the cool weather. And we've got this as a recording so that if you have issues, need to leave early, or you're not able to see the whole thing, you should be able to go back and visit our webinar again later. So I'm going to go ahead and start with some topics on how to get the most out of your garden every year. So our objectives, go ahead, Abby.
All right, go ahead.
And also, again, if you have not muted yourself, please mute yourself so that we don't have any feedback, and that would be very appreciated. I'd like to start with the fact that we are not experts at saving seeds. And so if you personally have done some of these things before and would like to start a chat conversation in our chat box, you're able to do that at the bottom of your screen. If it's hidden right now, wiggling your mouse, moving your finger should open that up, and you'll be able to see an option to your chat and enter information in there. If you have questions throughout our presentation, feel free to ask them there as well, and we'll try to answer them as we can, at least at the end of the presentation. Anything I missed, Abby?
I don't think so. Just to reiterate again, we're just sharing information that we found and that works for us. And the point of this is to spark your interest and to learn more. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat. And if you know the answer to anyone's question in the chat, feel free to answer that, and we will circle back around to those. But this is the point of these webinars. It's the beauty of these webinars, is that we are able to connect with people all over the state, and we do have people from all over the state here today. So it's exciting to share this information with you and share this passion that we all have.
All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're just going to start with the science of saving seeds. Obviously, the reason farming and gardening is still around because somebody somewhere started saving seeds. We're still producing our own food and have even learned different ways to make plants resilient to certain pests and diseases over time. And so that's the beauty of saving seeds and our technology as we move forward in our decades and into our technologies. Only recently have we seen commercial seed suppliers and proprietary seed genetics. I won't go into any specific cases. Some of us may know of particular ones, but the act of saving your own seeds can have some legal consequences when the variety or the genetics is copyrighted by a specific company. So when you're saving your own seeds, it must be your own genetics or of an open pollinated plant that can be easily collected without concern of unknown changes in genetics. So we'll get more to that in a minute, but I just wanted to make you aware of the seed sovereignty movement, which helps to fight for the right to breed and exchange diverse open sources of seeds. This is basically a movement that has been developed and is especially important in developing countries so that the farmer privileges are protected, as well as the heirloom varieties that have been passed down for generations and generations. So we see a little bit of that here, but that's more of a concern in those developing countries. Next slide, please. So the science of saving seeds or brown bagging. These are some different terms that you might use. Some of them may be a little bit more unfamiliar to you than others, but I wanted to go through a few definitions. So inherently saving seeds or brown bagging means to save the reproductive parts of a plant to use from year to year. Plants that are considered self-pollinators are great choices. We'll go through some of those later, as they have flowers that self-pollinate and produce seed that requires little or no special treatment before storage. These might include tomatoes, peppers, beans, and peas. There are biennials or 2-year crops that may be a little harder to save since the plants need that 2 growing season to set a seed. Think like carrots and beets, things like that. The zone you live in also can make a difference. So I know we see people from across the state on these webinars. So I personally am in zone 6 and some of 5B. And so I'm going to have a different concern for my zone and what I'm able to grow and save here than you might be able to in northern Indiana. So check with your zones and make sure you're looking at the varieties that work well for your area. Cross-pollinated plants are another definition that we'll term here. And these are ones with a separate male and female flower like corn or our vine crops. It's a little bit more difficult to keep these strains pure due to its ability to use Mother Nature to cross the genetics with other nearby plants of the same genus. So for instance, maybe a popcorn and a sweet corn patch are close by. And they might be able to cross-pollinate. Unfortunately, the outcome will neither be a sweet nor a well-popped corn. So that would be a seed not to collect and keep for future use because it's not what you're going to be looking for in that particular seed strain for your use. It does take some engineering to stop the wind, rain, and even insects to help these plants to cross-pollinate with the wrong, or to stop rather, these plants to cross-pollinate with the wrong types of different plants. So thinking about that and using that in your plan as you move forward is a big part of this whole saving seed scenario, if that's what you choose to go with. The next type of plant descriptions we will cover are open pollinators versus hybrid plants. Open pollinator varieties are the ones that are the most favorable option when choosing seeds to save for the next growing season, as these are either self or cross-pollinated plants that are very similar to the parent plant with nearly identical fruit. Many labels on your seed packets and transplant pots will indicate if the variety is an open pollinator or a hybrid. So if you've started something this year and you still have that pot or that package and you're interested in saving seeds of your favorite tomato variety, make sure that is an open pollinator, because the hybrid version may not give you just quite the right product for next year's particular harvest. Hybrids are the cross between two varieties and maybe combined traits of the parent plants to make a bigger fruit, more resistant to a particular disease, or increase the vigor of an offspring. It is possible to collect these seeds from the hybrids, but the subsequent offspring will bring out different traits of the parent plants that may not have been seen in the previous offspring, and it's nearly impossible to predict what traits are going to be passed on and the quality of the fruit that's produced out of these particular hybrids. Next, please. So when you start with the idea of wanting to save seed, it's best to start at the beginning when you're actually choosing those plants to plant, maybe at the beginning of the spring. So if you had thoughts this year in the spring that you wanted to save some of your seeds at the end of the season, which is now, make sure you have researched that they are open pollinated and self-pollinated varieties of the plants, if possible. If not, you'll need to have a plan to keep those cross-pollinated plants separately from the similar types of plants. You won't want to have next year's cauliflower come out purple if it's close to a broccoli plant. That is an interesting cross-pollination we like to do with some of our kid programs, but it does happen. And if you're not expecting it, it may be a little bit of a concern. It is going to take many plants to grow this season to produce enough genetic diversity for selection of the highest quality seed. So adding 5 plants may not be enough to get enough genetic diversity of those open pollinator, plants to collect the right quality plants that you want to have. You're looking for the characteristics of the plant that are especially of interest and important to you. If you want a great tomato to make a good red sauce, you really don't want to be choosing a variety that is producing a higher volume of tomato juice. The flowers may be produced in many varieties. Saving seeds may mean separating out your different colors and other genetic variants so that the seeds collected are more guaranteed to look like the plants that you expect to see in your next year. So it just takes a little bit of planning as you start your garden and put things out in your different areas around your yard. After harvesting, there are different ways to process your seeds to reduce your disease and increase germination rates in the following years. Some of these plants will require that they stay on the plant until it dies completely, while others can be collected and dried off the plant. We'll go into a little bit of this as we talk specifics about vegetables and flowers. But once they're dried, it is important to keep them in tightly sealed glass containers. You can store in little packets, either plastic or paper, and then combine several in one large glass jar. This kind of helps to keep the seeds dry. It keeps them organized. And then you would want to store that seed in a cool place between about 32 to 45 degrees, ideally. So if you've got room in your fridge, you've got a cellar, you've got somewhere where it's a stable condition, you want to set them in the back. So when you open the door, you don't have a change in your temperature, but don't forget about them. They may have only viability for 1 year. Again, we'll go a little bit more into that detail later. Desiccants can be added to help pull the moisture out of the air. The silica gel in the little packets like you get in some of your different products from the store. You can also find those silica beads in craft stores when for use of like drying flowers. So they'll be in bulk. Powdered milk wrapped in cheesecloth or facial tissue can also be used as a desiccant in the bottom of your jar. Don't forget to label your jars, not only with what kind of plant and variety, but when they were harvested and dried, and when you expect to maybe even use them, that's kind of up to you on the amount of storage labeling that you want. Germination rates are significantly reduced for every year left in the storage. So a safe guideline to use safe seed is within that 1 year with good germination rates and vigor. When you're ready to get those seeds out next spring, you will want to use some precautions to help reduce diseases like maybe bacterial cankers. You did the best you could to choose the seeds from your healthy, vigorous plants this last fall. So it's important to take those few extra steps in the spring to maintain the quality of your seed for the coming year. If you don't know where your seeds came from, maybe you had a seed exchange event, or you did purchase some seeds from an online seed swap. You may want to suspect there could be a disease from the year before and could use a seed treatment to help reduce the amount of disease that you're going to put into your new garden beds. Excuse me. So I've got 2 seed treatment methods that I found, and both can reduce the germination rate, especially when you have older seeds or really poor quality seeds. So just take that into mind as you listen and think about this. But there is a bleach water treatment where you can use a ratio of 1:4 bleach and water with a drop of dish soap. Adding seed to solution and allowing it to sit for 1 minute, stirring occasionally, and the seed should be able to float freely so all surfaces come in contact with the solution. After this time, you want to drain and rinse for 5 minutes under cool water. Of course, now the seed is wet, so it'll be right before the time you are intending to plant them, whether it's in your transplant packs or right into the ground. The other method is hot water treatment, where you have hot water around 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes. And then you'll move the seeds to water at 112 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. Drain and rinse for 5 minutes under cool water after this step. This is very important to keep these temperatures very close to 100 degrees and 112 degrees, as again, that germination rate and the vigor can be reduced if you get it too hot for too long. Let's go into a little bit more specifics now about some vegetable seeds.
All right. So coming into talking about vegetables, we are going to be getting into some of the varieties, the strategies, and the science behind saving seeds for vegetable production. So first, let's talk about the types of vegetables. And like Miranda talked about, most often you're buying seeds that are 1 or 2 types. We've got hybrid plants, and then we've got heirloom plants. So the main difference is the pollination strategies, like she said. Hybrid seeds are more of a one-off type, and if you save the seeds, you might not get an identical offspring. So hybrid seeds aren't really designed to save from year to year. Heirloom seeds, on the other hand, are open pollinated. So there's not really one, it's not better than the other one when you're producing vegetables, but it's just one's better for saving seed than the other. Heirloom seeds, they're usually going to say on the package pretty clearly that they're heirloom seeds. So methods of saving seeds. So a lot of the time, what you do to save seeds, you do it in one of 2 ways. You either save those seeds from the fruit or from the packet. And, the same goes to, again, there's no, correct way to do it. No one way better than the other. It just depends on how much work you want to put into it and get those seeds ready to go. So you can extract your seeds from the fruit or just save the packets. This picture here has a box that's organizing their seed packets, so you can even just save those. And I have a slide a little bit later on that talks about the viability of seeds and their longevity. So we will talk a little bit about that later on. All right, next we'll discuss some of the vegetables that have seeds that are easily extracted. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, peas, herbs, and lettuce are some of the easiest to extract seeds from to save for next year's planting. And the most important piece to remember when saving seeds is to let the fruit completely mature on the plant before picking it. This may mean letting it get a little wrinkly or even completely dried out in some cases, and getting those seeds from each vegetable is a little different, as you can see on this slide. Let's talk about some of these different methods. So for tomatoes, you've got that gooey inside of the tomato. So one of the ways that you can kind of separate the seeds from that goo, there were a couple of methods that I found. You can either soak them in a jar of water and kind of swirl it to separate that goo from the seeds, or you can place them on a paper towel or screen to try and kind of dry that goo off. Peppers are not as gooey on the inside, so that's a little bit easier, but you're going to scoop those out, let them completely dry. Tomatoes and peppers, it is again important to make sure you let those fruits completely mature on the plant. So they're going to look a little ugly. They're not going to look good to eat when they're ready to have their seeds harvested. Beans and peas, you're going to leave those on the plant until they're brown, totally dry. Let them dry. Just like the farmers let soybeans dry in the fields, let those dry in your garden if you're planning to save those seeds. You can continue to dry them out. Some of the methods that I saw suggested leaving the beans and peas in the pods to save them, and some of them said you can remove them. So I think, it's kind of whatever works for you. A lot of these are trial and error as far as what method you like the most and what works best for you. So try a couple of different things and experiment with it a little bit. Herbs and lettuce both are going to produce a stalk with seeds. You're going to continue to let them grow to that bolt stage, and you can gather those seeds kind of by rubbing them between your fingers when they're dried out completely and gathering those seeds that way. All right. Vine crops, biennials, and sweet corns are some of the more difficult seeds to save simply because of their nature. If you can plant heirloom varieties of these crops, you have a much better chance of getting viable seed than just any old plant that you had. This isn't to say it can't be done, but do your research to make sure what you've got will work, so you don't waste your time trying to save seed that biologically won't produce like you want. These crops are a lot more hybridized and have a lot more things going on in their biological makeup that make it a little more difficult. Okay. Considerations for storing seeds properly. One of the most important considerations you can have is to make sure your seeds are truly dry before storing. There are a few ways to test the moisture in your seeds. So when you extract your seeds and you're getting ready to put those in your airtight containers, if you press your fingernail into your seed and it leaves a dent, they're not dry enough. Continue drying until you cannot dent that seed with your fingernail. If they bend instead of snap, they're not dry enough. You're saving pumpkin seeds or a larger seed like that. They should snap when they are completely dry. They should not bend at all. And your seeds obviously shouldn't have any of the goo of the fruit left on them. And you should need a hammer to break your corn, beans, or peas. All right, so once your seeds are truly dry, then you can store them in airtight containers that won't allow moisture to seep in. Keep your seeds in a place with regulated constant temperature. Fluctuations in temperature will affect the viability of your seeds. Now, that being said, once you put them in their storage location, leave them alone. Every time you move them, check on them, open the container or the freezer or the fridge, you risk interfering with the viability of your seeds. Okay, some challenges to storing seeds. Any moisture that's still in your seeds when you put them in the airtight storage may cause condensation that leads to mold. If you see condensation on the inside of your container, whether it's a glass jar, a Ziploc bag, whether it's any kind of container, take them out immediately and finish drying them. You want to stop that process before it even gets started. You see any condensation. Storing your seeds in warm locations decreases the lifespan of your seeds. The ideal temperatures for storing seeds is 32 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll say that again. The ideal temperatures for storing your seeds are 32 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. All right. Every time you move them, you are, again, increasing the chances that they're not going to be as viable. So impatience is a big challenge to storing seeds. But you also want to make sure you label your seeds with the variety and the date you save them, and that can help with any confusion later on down the road. In this picture here, you can see they've labeled them with the variety and the year. Make sure you are consistent with your labeling so that you can stay on top of it.
And note too, I think in one of those packets, they've got that silica bead packet in the lava red sweet pepper, like we talked about earlier. So again, a desiccant in your main jar may help with a little bit of that condensation, but be sure you've got them absolutely dry so that you don't have that mold problem.
Okay. The temperature for storing was 32 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, this chart shows the average life span of different types of vegetable seeds. This is something to keep in mind when planning your garden for next year, which seeds are able to be kept longer. Of course, the storage of your seeds is something that's entirely dependent on how they're stored. So this is more, if these seeds were stored perfectly, they're going to last a little bit longer. But like Miranda said earlier, the good rule of thumb is just to use them within the year. If you're saving your own seeds, especially just for that margin of error, you can, use those within the year. Now, there are certain scientific, ways. They have cryogenic storage and freezing methods and things like that that do store these seeds for longer. But if we are going to plant them just with the basic kind of seed storage methods, then the best way to use them is within these kind of recommendations.
And also with that, I do believe they do, especially on the open pollinators, always have growth every year to continue a seed bank. I know some of them are saved for so many years, again, cryogenically, but they're at that cold stage. They're being held at the perfect moisture. So all of the parameters that we've kind of talked about today, they're going to be using those specifically to make sure that those are kept in place, and they're monitoring that on a regular basis.
When you're storing your seeds in your basement, in your freezer, wherever you are, unless you have a lab set up with a lab grade freezer with temperature control and regulation and all of that stuff, there's always something that could go wrong. When they're storing these seeds in large seed banks, like you asked, they're storing these in the top of the line locations with backup power generators, and they've got automatic temperature regulations and moisture control and all kinds of things, and they've got sensors all over these things. So they are much more likely to keep these seeds for a lot longer than we could just in our residential lives. Okay, so after storage, this is the fun part, right? You get those seeds out and you're ready to go. So about a month or so before you're ready to start planting your seeds, you're going to want to do a germination test and make sure your seeds are viable. So testing viability and germination, that's going to give you a good idea of how successful your storage was, and let you know if you need to supplement with some new seeds. That maybe things didn't quite go according to plan. This is going to give you a good idea of just how far off the mark you are with your storage process, and let you know if you need to do anything to kind of mitigate that. Couple of different things when you're going to test viability. This is about a month before planting, right? So we're not doing this in the middle of the winter. We're doing this when we're getting close to being ready to plant. Drop your seeds in a jar or bowl of water. Kind of swirl them around a little bit. You skim off any floating seeds off the top, and seeds that sink are viable. Now, this isn't a 100% proven method, but it is a good rule of thumb, and it's a simple test that you can do that's going to get rid of some of those seeds that are really dead, that are not going to produce anything. Testing germination, you're going to do, that simple science experiment that we all did in biology, in high school. Place 10 seeds in a wet paper towel, and then, wrap that in a, let's see, hold on. getting ahead of myself there. You're gonna wrap those in a wet paper towel, store them in a warm, dark place, and within a few days or a week, depending on the type of seed it is, some seeds take longer to germinate than others, but you're gonna begin seeing some germination, and you can do the math to multiply that out. If you've got 10 seeds, how many of those seeds germinated, and give you a percentage for the number of seeds that you're most likely to have in your package that are going to germinate. Right. So that kind of wraps up our vegetable section. We're going to get into our flower section now and talk about how to save seeds from flowers.
Yeah, so of course, flowers are going to be fairly similar to our vegetables. They still are going to produce a seed, and we're going to be looking and waiting for those seeds to be mature. So leaving the plant to completely mature and dry, it's not always pretty, and we want to deadhead and clear those off, but waiting for that maturity for the seeds to harvest is very important for the viability and vigor of those seeds. You'll want to let them to continue to dry in a paper bag. Don't forget to label that bag with what you've got in there, especially if you've got several different colors of your different, let's say, zinnias or any of those natures, where you want to make sure you know which colors are which. I'm horrible about pulling up my bulbs for my irises and forgetting which ones are yellow, which ones are purple, which ones are white, and then getting a mixture later when I put them back out in the garden. So after a week or two, you're going to want to go back, open that bag, gently break apart the head and separate those seeds from the shaft. And the most viable, strong, and healthy seeds will usually be in the middle of the flower head. So those are the ones you want to at least particularly focus on and pick out to save. Okay.
Now this is just a short list of some of the easiest seeds to save. It's by no means a comprehensive list. Just meant to kind of get the wheels in your mind turning. If this is some of these, if these are some of the plants that you have, and you might want to start saving those seeds from those. Absolutely.
These are, for the most part, annuals. You'll see echinacea is on this list as well. It is a perennial, but does have plenty of seeds. So if you are looking to do a seed exchange at some point, it would be a great option to collect from, so that you can do something of that, or even move them to a new garden bed or a new location completely. So, and then others on this list too, of course, are going to, in different zones, act more like a perennial and could come back in the next year on its own. So know what you're going with, collect your seeds correctly, and go with that plan as you go along with your season. Next.
All right, so bulbs. What about plants with bulbs? If you've got some bulb plants, let's talk about how you're going to overwinter them. You can divide them and save them and share them. So some of these plants are more hardy than others. So we will get right into talking about bulbs. All right, so hardier plants like daffodils and crocuses can be left in the ground to overwinter. You can divide them and immediately replant those. But some of the more tender bulbs need more attention. So gently is the key word here, to dig them up and let them dry in a very well ventilated area for a few weeks. Remove any dirt or foliage that is still attached and make sure that they are completely dry. You can use a variety of methods to store bulbs. I use paper bags with peat moss. Some people use a nylon pantyhose with sawdust. Some use a mesh vegetable bag that you get from the store, like in this picture. It's totally up to you. And the main purpose of using moss, sawdust, or another material is to keep the bulbs from touching one another. This keeps them from holding moisture in one spot and further prevents molding or sprouting of fungal disease in that kind of storage state. So make sure you store them in a cool, dry place, and you can hang them up or store them in a basket like this picture shows. You don't want to store them in an airtight container like your seeds. These bulbs need to breathe. You can check them every month or so, spray them with a little water if it looks like they're getting too dry. Just don't soak them. They like to be damp and satisfied. They don't like to be drowned. They're very picky. And these bulbs don't like wet feet. So if you can keep them moist but not soaked, that's even better.
A cellar is a pretty ideal spot for bulb storage. If you've got that option, that's probably your most ideal location to collect and save those bulbs over the winter. Okay.
Here are some of the specifics for those more tender bulbs. This information was found, it was shared by Susan Marr from the University of Wisconsin. The link to this is in our resources slide at the end. But again, we'll be uploading the recording of this presentation to YouTube and sending it out afterwards along with the slides. So don't worry if you don't get everything down as we go. I know this slide is a little bit word heavy, but you know, we talk about these bulbs being more tender and more delicate. So knowing what you have and knowing how to take care of them is going to be a very important part of saving these and the success that you have with these. Right. Stratification, germination, and planting. So again, the fun part, right? Getting these seeds out after you've stored them. Cold stratification might be necessary for some plants that have a hard outer coating on the seed. This process consists of soaking seeds in water for 1 to 2 hours and then laying them out on a paper towel or coffee filter that's damp but not soaking wet. Wrap that in a dry paper towel and place it in a Ziploc bag, seal it, date it, and place it in your refrigerator a month prior to planting. So these plants that I've got listed here are some of those that really need to be stratified. Kind of gives them a wake-up call, right? When they've been in storage for the winter, they have a harder outer shell that's going to need a little bit more time to wake up from being stored. So you're gonna go through that stratification process. There were a couple of different stratification processes that you can find online, but this one is one that's pretty foolproof, just using a paper towel. So the similar method to that germination, but just you're gonna seal them back up for about a month before you're gonna plant them. And again, you're going to want to test the viability of your seeds and the germination rates. So whenever you're storing your seeds, even for your flowers, just be aware of how many you're going to have that are actually going to bloom, and kind of see what all you've got space for in your garden this year and what all you need to supplement with. Okay. So our key points and takeaways from this talk today, we've got some dry, cold, important parts of the process. So important to keep your seeds dry and cold. Dry all seeds prior to storage. You're gonna want to store your seeds in an airtight container after being completely dry. Freezer, lower temperature you can get is the best environment for dry storage that's completely sealed and not opened for temperature fluctuation. And if you didn't catch the recurring theme here, the key here is dry, dry, dry. So always make sure your seeds are completely dry before you do anything with them, before you put them in storage or have really any interaction with them. Make sure they're completely dry.
Okay.
All right, and this is our resources slide. You can visit any of these sites to kind of pick out some of the different information that we have had. And so then we can go right on through. All right.
Okay, we had a couple of questions about stratification methods and asking about seeds purchased at a store. would you stratify those as well? And because it's dried and stored similarly to the ways we're asking for you to start your new seeds, yes, stratification would work best to help wake those up and get those hard shells a little bit softened to break up. Repeating stratification methods, it probably depends on the seed, and working and researching a little bit more on that particular one.
The stratification method that I did talk about, though, was you are going to kind of soak your seeds in water. So kind of I'll just go slow through that. So if you're going to take notes, you can get that down. Soak the seeds in water for 1 to 2 hours. Lay them out on a paper towel or coffee filter that's damp. Then you're going to wrap that bundle in a dry paper towel and place it in a Ziploc bag. You're going to seal that Ziploc bag. Make sure you write the date on it, and then place it in the refrigerator for about a month prior to planting. So you're just kind of jump starting that germination process. Okay, Miranda, there's one here, fermenting seeds for a few days in tomatoes.
I have not looked at the fermenting of the seed. I know that helps naturally use biologicals to reduce some diseases, but I don't know how necessary it is for seed saving. I think it just is dependent on how you're using those, and I'd have to do a little bit more research. So Candace, if you'd like, we'll put our emails in the chat, and you're welcome to email with specifics, and we'll try to get your answers. There was a question on saving cucumber and squash seeds. Are you having problems with the outcome in the next year, or is that an issue with actually collecting and storing the seeds? And again, if you want to ask, collecting and storing. Okay. So those, again, are those cross pollinators. It's a little more difficult to get those collected and dried and all of that sense, but you should be able to lay those out. I like to use a screen. I have like an old screen that I've laid out on sawhorses that I lay my seeds out to dry for a little bit before I put them away, and that kind of helps to make sure they get dried on both sides and they're not stuck and kind of wet. So you might look at that, and again, making sure they're absolutely dry. It's a little harder on those to make sure they're absolutely dry. So trying a desiccant like those silica beads in a jar to help suck more of that moisture out would be very helpful to reduce that moisture. Freezing, if you still have moisture in the seed when you freeze, you can reduce the viability and germination rate. So just again, we can't stress enough, dry is the best way to make sure you have a good viable seed. Freezing pawpaw seeds, again, you don't have to freeze them. It's the drying and to store and keep it viable and vigorous. How long? They're probably going to be able to save them, be viable for a little bit longer, that with being a native species for Indiana. I would say the biggest deal again is dry. Make sure those seeds are dry before you go to store them.
When I go to dry seeds, I dry them more in a darker place. I don't lay them out in the sun to dry, but it doesn't have to be a dark room per se, but you definitely don't want to leave them out in the sun to dry them
Yep. I keep mine in my garage, or I've got a cellar at a farm that I am renting for a couple of different avenues. And so I can even put things down in that cellar for a little bit of time. Again, I am in love with the ability to use a cellar, and that concentrated and even temperature and the moisture stays about the same. So I use that as much as I possibly can for collecting, drying, storing, all of that.
Thank you, Kim, for putting that in the chat.
Yes.
That cucumbers have to over mature on the vine, not at the eating stage. And that goes back to what we talked about, leave them until they're ugly.
Yep.
Leave them on the vine, leave them on the plant till they're wrinkly. In the natural process of things, these fruits are going to fall off the plant and, grow from where they fall. So for those seeds to be completely mature, they need to be to that ugly, wrinkly stage where they're almost ready to fall off the plant to collect the seeds for the best, outcome. Did put a poll up. So if you wouldn't mind to answer a couple of those questions and give us a little bit of feedback on the presentation that we gave today, we would really appreciate it. We want to thank you guys for attending this Lunch and Learn today. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago and just wanted to kind of do a little Lunch and Learn presentation. I know my Master Gardeners love Lunch and Learns. So it was something that we kind of started just putting together for them, and it kind of blew up from there. So we're excited to be able to just share really any information for you guys. That way, any of you who are Master Gardeners and need more education hours can still count this as an education hour. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
And look forward in the next months or so for new webinars. We're going to try to have something available every month for different topics throughout the next year. Yep. So we appreciate your support.
Yep. And especially if you haven't already, if you want to go, if you're on Facebook, go on and search for the Purdue Extension Orange County and Purdue Extension Harrison County. So you want to check out those Facebook pages, follow those so that you can stay up to date and check out the webinars that we have coming up.
Great. Yes, we will have the PowerPoint available as a PDF in the comments of our recording that will be posted to our YouTube page.
Yep. And I will send that link out to everyone, just like you received the Zoom link. I will send out the YouTube link with that PowerPoint slides in the Zoom chat. So thank you all so much.
Appreciate it and have a great rest of your day. Okay, looks like everybody who's going to answer his.
Yep, I'm trying to download the results. Here we go.
I learned something.
Oh, good.
I got a bunch of Master Gardeners asking me about this topic, so when I seen you were doing it, I'm like, and register.
Awesome. You're more than welcome to use our slides too. I'll send it over.
That would be fantastic. If you want to drop them in box or something, I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Will do.
But I was glad I was able to make it. So.
Yeah, me too.
Apparently I wrote down on my calendar Area 3 soils judging.
Oops.
I so thought it today, drove all the way up to Princeton, have my boots on, everything. No, it's Monday.
I think my dad's hosting that this year. So
I think so, which is why I said something.
That's
and I was like, that's hilarious.
Maybe that was what was causing the confusion.
Totally.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because it's your dad.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Have a good
You
Thanks.
too.
Bye.